There's a common objection raised by skeptics of Christianity: the validity of the story of Jesus. Sure, there are the Gospels, those considered canonical and those that are not canonical, which serve as a record. However, since the Gospels were recorded by Christians, there is the possibility of Christian bias. Conversely, if there was a non-Christian source about Jesus, they would be less skeptical because such source would lack a Christian bias. Now, ignoring the fact there are sources like Josephus, Tacitus, and the Talmud, what those skeptics are usually referring to is an eyewitness account by a non-Christian which corroborates the story of the Gospels. Now, nothing like that even remotely exists. However, in 2016, a film was released telling the account of a fictional Roman's perspective of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. This is Kevin Reynolds' Risen. The movie Risen centers around Clavius, a Roman soldier played by veteran actor Joseph Fiennes. Clavius is a tribune, which is a high-ranking Roman officer, serving with the 10th Legion.
Legion 10.
In the Roman province of Judea. Our story with Clavius begins with him and his men putting down a revolt by a zealot named Barabbas.
When the Messiah comes, Rome will be nothing! Until then.
After defeating the rebellion, Clavius and his men head back to the barracks, and before he can even wash up from the battle,
Pilate summons you.
he gets summoned to see Pontius Pilate, played by Peter Firth.
Did you win?
Clavius can see a riot or some type of incident has taken place here. Pilate informs him that the Sanhedrin brought him an unnamed Nazarene who was accused of various crimes and demanded that he be put to death. In order to quell the crowd,
I had to crucify him. Don't give me that look. I've had enough already.
now Pilate is obviously feeling some guilt as he commands Clavius to
And do this Nazarene a small mercy. Break his legs.
Before he leaves, Pilate assigns a young man named Lucius, played by Draco Malfoy, Tom Felton, to be his aide.
His father's a friend.
Wait, does that mean that Pilate was Slytherin? Just as Clavius and Lucius leave the gates of Jerusalem, there is an earthquake. They reach the crucifixion site where there is a large crowd observing. 3 men are crucified. 2 of them are very much alive and suffering greatly. The third...
The Nazarene, is he dead yet?
After only 6 hours.
He can't be. Has he spoken? Has he spoken?
Just before the tremor, he said it's finished.
Clavius orders the legs of the 2 living men to be broken. When it comes to the Nazarene, Clavius has a change of heart, deciding to have the likely dead man struck with a spear instead. The Romans wait for the 2 men to finally die before removing them from their crosses and then dumping them in a mass grave. However, before they can take down the body of the Nazarene, a man shows up who's received Pilate's permission to take the body and bury it in his own tomb. After a hard day's work, Clavius joins Pilate in the baths to discuss the Nazarene.
It's a strange case. Never seen a death so wished for, even by him. It's as if he wanted to be sacrificed.
They're fanatics. Yahweh deranges them.
Yes, no other gods and all that.
The next morning, Clavius and his men see to the cremation of their fallen comrades from the battle the day before, when...
Tribune, Pilate summons you.
Pilate and the Sanhedrin are discussing the Nazarene. Specifically, they're worried his followers will come and steal his body. The Nazarene had claimed that he would rise from the dead, and the Sanhedrin are worried if his followers steal the body, this will cause more upheaval. In order to prevent this from happening, the Sanhedrin asked the Romans to guard the tomb because they would also be neutral in any inter-Jewish disputes. Claudius and his men inspect the tomb and seal it. He orders 2 men, the same 2 men from the crucifixion, to stand guard at the tomb. Claudius sees the man who buried the Nazarene and asks who he was.
What was his name? The Nazarene.
He was called Yeshua.
Oh, yeah, surprise. It was Jesus. Bet you didn't see that coming. The next morning, on what I presume was supposed to be Claudius's day off,
Tribune, Pilate summons.
he shows up to see an angry Pilate.
The Nazarene.
Of course, the Nazarene. His tomb is stone empty.
Very angry Pilate.
Who did you put on the detail? I want them found and lashed to death, preferably.
The Sanhedrin show up, saying Jesus' followers came in the night, took the body by force, and that they know this because the guards fled to them for their protection. However, Pilate and the Sanhedrin are worried that without the body, a rebellion will start.
It's not enough. Without a corpse to prove him dead, we have a potential Messiah.
This is Claudius now switch roles, so to speak, going from soldier to detective. He starts by bringing in people for questioning, including the disciple named Bartholomew. They even locate and arrest Mary Magdalene in order to question her. In all this, they get the claim that Jesus has actually come back to life. Claudius is skeptical of these claims. Using an informant, Claudius is able to locate the rest of the disciples, but they don't know the exact building. Claudius barges into the last house, looks around, and then recognizes one of the men, and then has what can best be described as a WTF moment. Claudius is in shock at what he's seeing. He knows this is no illusion. What he's seeing is not a lie.
I have seen 2 things which cannot reconcile. A man dead without question, and that same man alive again. I pursue him, the Nazarene, to ferret the truth.
Claudius has already put an enormous amount of energy and effort to learning the truth, so he feels obligated to follow the disciples as they go north to Galilee as they attempt to meet up with Jesus. Claudius even helps the disciples evade the Romans. They reach the Sea of Galilee, where Simon decides,
Let's fish! Come! Come on! He'll find us!
At dawn the next morning, Simon begins to converse with an unknown man on the shore. He tells him to... So they do, and they catch a multitude of fish. It turns out the man was... I bet you didn't see that one coming. Claudius and his disciples spend time with Jesus, and he sees Jesus cure a man of his leprosy. That night, he gets a chance to talk with Jesus and ask him some questions. Just as the sun is rising the next morning, the disciples awake to find that Jesus is no longer with them. But they see him in the distance, as the sun is behind him.
Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all nations. You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, and all Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And know that I will be with you, always.
And then finally ascends back into heaven in what is most easily the most awesome ascension scene I have ever seen in the history of cinema. As the disciples head back south to Jerusalem for the events of Pentecost, Claudius heads in another direction, unknown what really is in his future. Now, obviously, this movie is a work of fiction. However, I think it does give us an interesting story as to how a Roman would have reacted to all of this. One thing I enjoyed about this movie is how Claudius and the Roman soldiers were being depicted. In Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, depicts Roman soldiers as being really barbaric and vicious throughout. That's not true in Risen. Claudius is certainly a capable soldier and commander, however, he's not a ruthless individual. For example, during the funeral scene, we see that he has affection for one of the fallen men. Conversely, the two soldiers who are running the crucifixion actually show empathy for the men they have crucified, being glad when they can hasten their deaths to the thieves by breaking their legs.
Won't be long now.
As our protagonist, Claudius is seen as someone who has a great sense of duty. Originally, his duty was to figure out what happened to Jesus' body, and went to great lengths such as digging up other bodies to see if it had been hidden among them, which actually enraged Pilate because he cares more about maintaining peace than learning the truth. When Claudius learns that Jesus has actually come back to life, he still thinks that his duty to learn the truth is more important than serving the Empire, and thus he deserts his post. He knows that if he gets caught, he'll likely get put to death, which is why at the end of the movie he doesn't join the apostles in going to Jerusalem, where pretty much the entire garrison would recognize him. This is also a pretty unique movie that depicts Jesus. Usually, our first encounter with Jesus has him very, very much alive. However, the first time we see Jesus in Risen, he's dead. As well, Jesus is depicted by a non-white actor. Most movies have a white actor, such as Jim Caviezel or Ewan McGregor. In Risen, Jesus is depicted by Cliff Curtis, a Maori New Zealander. In the end, Risen is a movie that shows us the story of the death and resurrection of Jesus from the viewpoint of a fictional Roman. And if you haven't seen it, I'd strongly recommend you take the time to watch it. Thank you very much, and God bless.